Hi, welcome to a new reading vlog. This is going to be focused on the 1880s. Hopefully I'll get it out in time for, or like just after Victober has ended. Like, not all of these books are technically Victorian because they're from different places, but I'm just interested in reading these books, so I thought I may as well put them all together because the 1880s is like an interesting time period, even if it's not just focused on Victorians. I'm gonna just go through like the books that I'm gonna try to read, and obviously once you finish watching this video you'll know whether or not I fail. But yeah, I've put them in like chronological order. So this book is the first one, and it's The Rebel of the Family by Eliza Linton. And this is a Victorian book and it was published in 1880. It looks very big. It's like this long, so we'll see. The next book is The Story of an African Farm by Olive Schreiner, which was published in 1883. And this book like was written by a South African author, but she was living in the UK, so I would count it as a Victorian book, but obviously it doesn't need to be one for me to be reading it in this vlog. But yeah, this is like a very like specific kind of book for like proto-feminist and socialist stuff that's going on in the 1880s, so it will be interesting to read. But I think I've said this before, but like I'm not looking forward to it because I do think it also is like colonial, but you know, maybe I'll be proved wrong. I don't think I will be, but maybe. The next is a translated book from the Swedish, yeah, and that's Money by Victoria Benedictson, translated by Sarah Death, which is a fucking cool name, and it's about marriage and money and the classic themes of the period. Then another book that I'm hoping to find a physical copy of is Madame Bovary, which was not published in the 1880s, but the first translation into English was published in the 1880s. I couldn't find it exactly, but it's between 1885 and 1886, and that translation was done by Eleanor Marx, and so I'm going to read that translation, and I'm going to think about it less of a book by Flaubert and more of a book by Eleanor Marx, and like think about what that makes it mean. I haven't ever read Madame Bovary before, but yeah, I specifically sought out like Eleanor Marx's translation, and I have found a copy that is an audiobook, so I think I'll read it in that way, but I would also like a physical copy so I can like, you know, pin it down. Mari also has a copy of Reuben Sachs by Amy Levy, which is a book I've wanted to read for ages. It's very short too, which is nice. Amy Levy was also publishing other things in the 1880s. Specifically, this is 1888, and her other book, The Romance of the Shop, is also from 1888, but I haven't found a copy of that, so yeah. Then I have a book that like I should have already finished by now, and I mentioned it on this channel many times before, but that's Jill by Amy Dillwyn. This was published in 1884, but I didn't want to include it in the new books that I haven't talked about before very much section, but hopefully I'll finish this. But honestly, at this point it's not very likely. So I also have one non-fiction book that I might get to, which is The Untold Lives of the Women Killed by Jack the Ripper, which tells the story of Polly, Annie, Elizabeth, Catherine and Mary Jane. It's not entirely focused on the 1880s, but I believe that's when Jack the Ripper was happening, so I also thought it might be like interesting kind of contextually, especially because the women that were murdered, they are working class women, and I don't really think that, perhaps Jill more so than the others, but I don't really think that the others in this collection, although maybe The Rebel of the Family, will focus on working class women as much as I would like them to. So yeah, those are some books to try to read in the next couple months, and I will keep you updated with my journey. Cool. Bye. I'm just popping in from the future in terms of the time frame of this vlog, but just to verbally warn you that this vlog talks about suicide, specifically in relation to novels, as in like characters in novels, generally women, and also authors, again generally women authors. I think there's only one time when it's gone into like detail about like the method. Yeah, I just wanted to say this whole vlog kind of often like talks about references suicide, so if you're not up for listening to that, or you just need a warning, then this is that. But otherwise I hope you enjoy the vlog and or find it interesting to listen to, or whatever, take something away from it. Yeah, okay, I'll let you get back to it. Just film an update about my reading, and I'm going to spoil the like end of Madame Bovary, which is the book that I just read. So this is like a spoiler warning. I will also be talking about suicide, so that's also a warning I guess for this section. So I read Eleanor Marx's translation of Madame Bovary. One of the reasons I wanted to do that is just because I love Eleanor Marx, so I'm just interested in what she's doing, and she was like very internationalist in her approach, so she's also translated like Ibsen and things like that, and I don't know, I guess I also was kind of like, well, if Eleanor spent time and attention in translating a book, which is obviously like a work of like re-authorship and collaboration and effort, then this book could be interesting in that respect. And I do, you know, I have read some Ibsen plays. I don't think I've ever read any of her translations of them. Plus he is like a very specific like 1880s, 1890s proto-women's movement vibe. With that context, and then also with the context of how Eleanor Marx died, which is that she committed suicide, and she did it in the way that Madame Bovary does, which is poison. That's obviously like extremely sad and extremely tragic, and I did find reading the book really difficult because of that, because I knew what was going to happen, and because I knew that the person who had like translated the words in this book was going to, I don't know, I guess like the book itself maybe was going to like leave such an impact on her that she sort of thought about it when she wanted to die, which is really sad. And yeah, I mean like the book itself I didn't think was particularly good. I didn't think it was like terrible, and I did like some of the writing. I definitely feel very uncomfortable about a lot of the way that like bodies, especially disabled bodies, were like represented and used in the narrative. Just like, I don't know, there's like an amputation and somebody has like a club foot, and there's like this blind man who kind of winds in and out of the narrative, which like maybe is a point, but you know, he's a narrative device or like a plot device or like a kind of atmospheric person, you know, somebody who's there not to really be a person but to provide like the setting. And yeah, I just didn't like that, and I also kind of I tried not to think about this book as much as maybe I would have if I was not reading a book about suicide, and also one about like that feels that it's also about like Eleanor Marx's suicide too. I mean obviously people love this book, which I don't really understand why, but that's fine, but people also hate this book, and they really hate Emma, who's, you know, the main character, which I don't really understand like that much. Like she's not like a great person, but like, I mean maybe it shows my like own mental state that I was like, well, you know, I think it's fair for her to be bored and like horrible to her husband. But I guess also something I read before this that Eleanor Marx wrote was this like political kind of treatise or whatever, or article. It's like fairly brief, and I'll leave a link to it so you can read it, but called The Woman Question. And it's about like the place of women, it's about like the fact that women are doubly expropriated as like workers, it's about, yeah, it's just about feministy type Victorian socialist text. And I think it's like really important to think about in terms of like Eleanor Marx's whole approach to like all the work she was doing. It sort of comes to the conclusion, and it talks very directly about being misunderstood, and how in a liberated, and obviously in her idea like a socialist world, women will not be misunderstood by men anymore, and can be in relations of comradeship with each other in ways that are freeing rather than constraining. And you know, marriage is seen as a bad thing, something that traps women. And she's, yeah, like Eleanor Marx doesn't, like, she's not actually like particularly pro free love, and she clearly was very into monogamy, which is fine. Yeah, but the thing is that didn't really work for her, because she had this awful partner called Edward Aveling, who apparently wrote that tract with her, but like most people don't think he actually did, because he's an awful person. But you know, like he cheated on her and stuff like that, and I don't think he really did ever understand her. And Emma also really struggles with being misunderstood, because her husband just thinks that she loves him even though she doesn't really know him or care about him. And there's so many moments when, and oh, she uses that like against people, I guess, because then she like can be manipulative and like sort of get her own way to some degree, and successfully trick her husband into like allowing her basically to cheat on him multiple times. But yeah, I don't know, it like all comes from this basis of like marriage is not good for her, and she just wants to be understood. And she also is quite greedy and stuff, so I can understand like being, you know, maybe it's also because I'm a Capricorn and I was like, that's valid. She just wants nice curtains. And she wants, you know, a man who looks like Louis XIII or whatever. Obviously, like, I haven't read the original French book, but I have read some other books that were translated into French around like that same period. And I found the translations to be like kind of clunky, and obviously even today you can still get quite like a clunky and awkward translation. So I kind of had expected that going in, just because I feel like modes of translation have also, and like I guess the way we think about translation has also developed in a way that maybe helps translators to actually practically do it in a more direct manner. But also clearly it's just like kind of about the person and maybe the vibe and like, you know. But I didn't find it to be clunky at all. I thought it was like really well translated and just like very tender and compassionate at times.
You don't want to, you know, do anything to disrupt your loyal fan base. Bye, Anne-Marie.
Yeah, it's a good translation, but you know, the book is sad, and yeah, Emma's just also like very lonely, you know, and she's also like played tricks on by other people, especially one of the men in it. Also like, oh gosh, the ending was pretty unbearable. It is like really awful, but then it just keeps going after she's died, and you get to hear like this pharmacist's opinions about all of it, which is just such like bullshit, and he's so annoying. He's so annoying throughout the whole book. But anyway, I don't really think there's anything else I want to say. Like I think if I say any more, like I will also just get very upset, and you know, I guess it's really hard when people have legacies that are full of hope and action and energy, and also of just clear and deep loneliness and despair, and it feels a bit wrong not to engage with at least some of that, and I guess this is like one way of me trying to do that with Eleanor Marx. But yeah, I mean, like I said before about her other translations and kind of like the time period, I do think it is also very interesting that like this book was translated into English for the first time in the 1880s, because the 1880s is, you know, an era of like the sort of upspread, I can't think of the right word, but like of ideas about and against marriage, both like marriage reform, but then also like, you know, free love, which is to say love outside of marriage, relationships outside of marriage. And like from those ideas, obviously you can probably tell that like some people did them like really beautifully and other people did not, and generally it was like men who didn't suffer many consequences for their free love unions, and women who bore the brunt of the societal prejudices as well as the like literal physical consequences, including, you know, like having children and being just like left by their awful male partners. But obviously some people did it alright, but yeah, unfortunately Edward Aveling did definitely not treat Eleanor Marx alright. Yes, I guess it does feel like quite like a middle classy book, which is maybe not what I would like for it, but yeah, maybe I'll talk about like class politics and Eleanor Marx another time, but probably not because I'm too tired. I think like I'm gonna read this book by Amy Levy next, Reuben Sachs, which is about Jews in the East End. I think it was like a little bit controversial amongst Jewish people at the time, but yeah, I'm interested in seeing it, and it's like kind of short and hopefully will not be fucking tragic as what I just read. Luckily with Persephone editions, like the text is not too small, so that's also nice. Gosh, I hope next time I get to talk to you about something that's less sad and I have a bit more energy, but I will see you next time. The lighting is not great here, but I just wanted to briefly do like a show and tell, because basically I'm in a different place, which means there's a bunch of books that are like family books and stuff. Oh, it's not a copy including books kind of like this, which is a copy of Dombey and Son. Well, it was awarded to my mom when she left school. But I also just love this copy of The Bell by Iris Murdoch, and I also thought I would just show you like some other things that I found on this bookshelf. Okay, so this made me laugh. There's this Rachel Cusk book called Saving Agnes, which is her first novel. I'm deeply uninterested in what Rachel Cusk is doing, but I know that everybody's obsessed with her, and I think it's funny that like my parents completely out of touch with that kind of vibe. Have her first novel. I also found this book, which is Stevie Davis' Impassioned Clay, which actually sounds very interesting. Anyway, so there's that. I don't think I'm going to film here anymore, but I might try to read this, but not in this vlog, obviously. This is like how not to light anywhere, but I did just discover 2 volumes of Capital by Karl Marx, and I wanted to hold them up and show you. Let's see what they are. They're my grandfather's, so this edition is from 1942, so I would presume both of them are, because they're done like this, but that's fun. And what's interesting, and also a joke that I was gonna make in this vlog, is that like the first editions, like the first translated editions of Capital from German into English were translated in the 1880s. So I was like, haha, I'm gonna make a joke that I'm gonna read Capital in this vlog. I'm not gonna read Capital. I don't think I'll ever read Capital. Anyway. No. Hi, just here for an update about Reuben Sachs by Amy Levy, which I finished, yeah. I feel quite like equivocal about this book. I'm not really sure how I feel about it. It was like kind of easy to read and maybe like slightly boring, but also quite interesting and very sad, or a little bit sad at the bare minimum. I think it's interesting that it's called Reuben Sachs and not another name. There's not much about this plot that I can really tell you, except that like Reuben Sachs is this like 20-something guy, late 20-something guy, and he just has come back from somewhere because he had like a collapse of the nerves or whatever, and so the doctor sent him away, and he's just come back from that, and he's looking fresh, and he's meeting up with all of his large family, including his like, well, I guess he doesn't have a large like very close family, but he has quite a large extended family. Yeah, and there's like obviously quite a lot happening around kind of like, well, it's like a satire of sort of Jewish, like Victorian Jewish life, and it's also, I think it does have some tenderness for like Jewishness too. Like I don't think it's all negative, but yeah, I don't know, I don't really know how to like synthesize this into some kind of like, oh, this is how I felt about it. I did want to say that like it is very much like in the moment, and also apparently I haven't read it yet, but I really want to read Daniel Deronda, but apparently it's sort of writing back to Daniel Deronda and being like, that is not what Jewish life is like. Yeah, there are also kind of like quite sort of 1880s references in it. I don't remember when Daniel Deronda was published, but I presume in the 1870s. But they also mentioned King Cophetua and the Beggar Maid, which also is the name of a painting, or like the King and the Beggar Maid, I believe, is a painting from one of the pre-Raphaelite painters at the time, which I also thought was really cool and sort of like interesting in a contextual way. And there's some stuff where like books are listed, not just Daniel Deronda, which is like explicitly mentioned in the text, being like, oh yeah, people think that we're like Daniel Deronda. There's also a convert character called Bertie in this, and like it's like a lot to read, I guess, as somebody who is converting, because like it's not like super negative, but he's just like completely ridiculous, I guess, is really the thing, which is just very sad. And it does have these characters who are like very much sort of, they're feeling so many emotions, they just seem like stone, if that makes sense, like, which I do understand, because I don't know, sometimes you just really cannot express your emotions on your face. Neurodivergent energy coming off me, but I feel like there was also more I was gonna say, but maybe if I you know, come up with it, then I will. This like reading vlog is clearly sort of brushed with suicide because Amy Levy also committed suicide like Eleanor Marx, but not, I mean, I don't think in the same way or anything, but in 1889 when she was only 27, which is like pretty sad. And so this came out like the year before that, which, yeah, I don't know, it's just very sad. The 1880s is clearly not a good era to be alive. I think that's everything I wanted to say about this book, and I think probably the next book I will read is gonna be Money by Victoria Benedictson. So yeah, that's on the list. Yeah, but I'm really glad to have read this. I was also going to maybe say something about, also Amy Levy was like in sorry, this is just about Eleanor Marx again kind of, but like Amy Levy and Eleanor Marx did like meet and cross, like their circles were cross / they were in the same circle-ish. Yeah, I really want to read a biography of Amy Levy that came out in like 2000 or something that was mentioned in the preface of this, although I would not recommend reading the preface before you read the book because I just think like it's such a short book. They just, although they don't give like super spoilers, but it's like there's only so many ways things can go, I guess. So yeah, there's that. All right, bye. Doing a casual lean on this doorway to talk to you in extremely bad lighting briefly about the fact that I just read Anna Karenina, and I was thinking about it alongside Emma Bovary and how like I think Anna Karenina is much better than Emma Bovary, but it definitely covers like similar ground / is kind of interesting in that sense, and like it also repeats like a lot of the misogyny, like both of them. And I don't know, it just made me think, like, it's from, like, I think it was written 1878, I want to say, so not quite 1880s. And also, like, honestly, was 1880s, like, the decade of, well, I guess it wasn't the 1880s, but I don't think it was translated in the 1880s, like Anna Karenina, so, because, like, okay, so the reason also, can you tell someone's very tired, this vlog, unpurposefully, like, not on purpose, is clearly kind of, like, exploring how, like, women killing themselves both in a literary and in a real sense. It's like, I don't know, part of like literary history, part of like leftist literary history, part of just very sad. And but it, you know, it also, it's, I think it's important to talk about it, you know, like there's a reason why these books still speak to women who read them today, and that's tragic. And it's also a place to like imagine a better future from, you know, like these conditions of gender are intolerable, like let's go on strike against gender, how can we do that? Anyway, I'm sure this was like completely out of focus, but I don't care, so bye.
Oh no.
Yeah, I'm recording.
Okay. Well, I should obviously start a few sentences back so I can say, in the place of the old local and national we have intercourse in every direction, universal interdependence of nations, intellectual creations of individual nations become common property.
Oh, look at her. Lotta. Hi, I haven't updated this vlog in a really long time because I just didn't want to read any of my 1880s books. partially because I guess I got a bit stuck on this because this was like the book that I had picked to read next, and then I did try to read it a bit but then I just couldn't quite get into it, but I have now made some progress. Yeah, before I talk about Money by Victoria Benedictson, translated by Sarah Death, which is what I just finished, Amanda, who is Butch Poetics or Byborg on Instagram, very kindly gave me this copy of Lucy by Amalia Scram, which is translated by Catherine Hanson and Judith Messick, and I think it's also from the 1880s, I think 1888 maybe, so it's obviously relevant to this reading vlog, but it's also relevant because when they gave it to me I was like, oh, like this sort of, the typeface looks really familiar and the black like spine, and what I then realised is that both of these books are published by the same press, which is called Norvik Press. They publish English translations of various Scandinavian works. They actually have like a Vigdis Hjort called like A House in Norway that I would really like to read, that is in translation, and yeah, and then they have this kind of like classic Scandinavian book series too, and they have this nice like logo. So yeah, I'm like really looking forward to reading this. Both Mari and Amanda have talked to me about the author and like her works, and I want to read, I think the one that they first introduced me to was called Betrayed, and this press does have like a translation of that too, so you know, I can check that out when I've read this. Yeah, so there's that. And then this book is, yeah, one that I just finished. The ending kind of surprised me, so I feel like I was in a different place as to like how I was going to talk about this book, but not in a bad way. I think it's a book that's quite like subtle or like understated. It's not particularly dramatic in a way, although there are moments of like very like heightened, maybe not quite conflict, but like emotion and behaviour, but also it feels very full to some degree of like womanhood, or like the experience of womanhood or something. I'm not sure if that's really the best way to say it, but you know, on the back it kind of compares it to like Madame Bovary, which as a comparison I really don't like actually. I think this book is way more kind of like complicated and like interior, has way more of like Selma Berg, who's the main character, has way more of her interiority in it, and is just kind of more like more realistic in a way, and more kind of like, I don't know, authentic. I guess part of that is that it is written by a woman, and like Victoria Benedictson, a bit like Amy Levy and Eleanor Marx, like she killed herself in the 1880s after having written this and a couple other works, I think plays and also like short stories and also maybe another novel, which yeah is really sad, and you know obviously affects like reading the novel, and also affects like how you even think about like how you think about how important the things that are being discussed in this novel. So it is a lot about marriage and about money, and kind of about like the corruption that marriage is when it's predicated on wealth and ownership of both money and also women. Like women become a kind of money, and that's like appalling, and it affects how women, especially like these young girls, experience their whole rest of their lives. Because yeah, so Selma Berg is the main protagonist, and she basically, it's about her life getting married to this like rich guy called Squire Christensen when she's like 15. It's sort of like, I don't know, like the whole time frame of the novel also kind of surprised me, and then the ending, like I said, was a surprise in a really amazing way. I thought it was very, really, I don't think I'm doing very well at like articulating my thoughts today, but just like I thought the way that it ended was very like touching, I guess, and also very modern for a book that's 140 years old. And yeah, I think the translation is pretty good, like as far as I can tell, obviously. There is also like a nice translators afterward in the back of this, which was interesting. This press, they haven't translated her other work, so you know, maybe if I come across that I will check it out. But yeah, it's nice because now I have actually read a book from Denmark, Sweden and Norway, so that's nice. Yeah, in terms of what I'm going to read next, I do have a couple options. I did actually pick this book, Jill by Amy Dillwyn, in my TBR jar for this month, July, but we are getting to the end of July, and I don't know, it's just like, there's something about it that like resists me reading it, and I think part of that is maybe like my expectations were that it was going to be like really gay and fun, and like it's interesting, but it wasn't as like delightful as I thought it would be. I got The Rebel of the Family. It's definitely a book I'd like to read this year. I did kind of think I would read it for Victober, but honestly I don't actually know. I will be like starting a PhD in September, so I don't really know how that's going to affect what I read. And whilst I think like the bulk of the texts that I'm going to be writing about for my PhD, at least at the moment, are from the 1890s, what was going on in the 1880s is like definitely relevant. So yeah, and obviously then I've got this one. Part of me is like, maybe I'll pick this one up. The only thing is I really don't like how white the pages are. It's like gave me a headache, which is why I got out my reading aid. I did actually want to say something else, which is that I was thinking about why the 1880s is just like this decade of women killing themselves. And then I was like thinking about how like it's also a decade that is associated, at least in like Britain, with the development of like new unionism and like this like real massive upswing in like socialist organising and utopian socialism and just like utopian desires and like explorations in general. And I was just thinking like maybe part of that is, you know, people committing suicide became just like so common that like the only way to go was up, and that's where some of the utopian like impulse to start imagining and writing and creating different worlds together kind of came from, or was like pushed, because it became so important to make a different world. So then more of the focus and energy was put on that. I don't know if that makes sense, and I don't think it's particularly accurate like in terms of a really wide reaching thing, but I guess for the books that I have been reading it feels like maybe that's part of it, because it is just like known as this decade of like deep hopefulness, but it's also kind of like hard to hold that alongside the clear deep despair that like a lot of these women who were like socialist or like leftist or whatever were also like holding on to. Yeah, I'll let you know what book I pick up. Maybe I'll read something completely different than all of these. Oh, that's what I also wanted to say about money. Yeah, like I said, I just feel like there's actually like a lot going on in this. There's definitely like some pretty like queer stuff going on at like some points, both in terms of like how ugliness is being written about, and then how like Selma has like desire generally, but also like she expresses like that she, you know, if she were a man she could love X woman, and like she likes to look at women and in a way that, yeah, it's really nice. And I mean I think you can also read some like trans energy from some of it, but it does feel very like weighted in womanhood, even if it's a kind of like alternative or like weird womanhood, which is kind of what's also really nice about it. So yeah, I like that. So yeah, alright, I'll talk to you when I next have done some reading. Bye! Sorry about the really bad lighting, and also there's a storm happening outside. The top that I was knitting in the last few clips, I finished. So I haven't blocked this, and it is actually like maybe less, like it's more of a browny yellow than I kind of imagined it would be like as a garment, but that's okay. And yeah, I'm wearing it for this now. But yeah, I was too excited about finishing it to not just wear it now. I haven't done any like 1880s published reading since finishing Money, but I have finally finished The Five by Reubenhold, and I'm not really sure, I'm actually very tired, so I mean obviously normally I thought I was gonna like really talk about this, but I'm not sure if I will, but like I did kind of want to mention it because I talked about how it's like a non-fiction book, and the murders of the women happened in the late 1880s, so I thought like it might be sort of interesting context, especially because it talks about the lives of working class women in the Victorian era, and it definitely does do that. And I would say that like I really respect the wealth of research that has gone into this, and like the amount of just like reading and collecting information and clearly like looking through archives painstakingly. I do have a lot of issues with it, but yeah, on a fundamental level I do think that this is important history to know, and like I'm not necessarily saying people shouldn't read this book, because I think it's really important to learn about working class women, but I do just think that like Hallie Reubenhold's kind of like approach is that like she wants to give like dignity back to the 5 women who were murdered by Jack the Ripper. So that's Polly Nichols, or Mary Ann Polly Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes or Kate Eddowes, and Mary Jane Kelly. And they're all different women, but they do all have like a lot of like crossover points in their experiences, in part because of how like incredibly awful working class life and sort of conditions were, including in kind of like, you know, institutions meant for the welfare of the working class. Anyway, and so, you know, an often repeated like thing about the 5 people that Jack the Ripper murdered was that they were all sex workers, and Hallie Reubenhold I think exclusively uses the term prostitutes the whole way through, which I don't really like. She's presenting this book as a kind of like resistance to that idea. I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with questioning those kinds of myths or stories, especially because the people whose voices we most want to hear from were, you know, not present because they were literally dead. But I find it really I found it really gross, like basically the whole time, that she's like desperately trying to prove that somebody isn't a sex worker, and that like she sort of needs to do that in order to give back dignity to these women, which I just find gross. You probably can see my Nadia inspired haircut very well. Oh, I mean not haircut, hairstyle. She says like sort of Jack the Ripper wasn't a killer of prostitutes, and I also feel like that's just like a way of erasing like explicitly 2 of these women's stories, because they did at one point or another engage in sex work, but also just like a really silly and moralizing way to like look at giving dignity back to people. And like, so Elizabeth Stride and Mary Jane Kelly, I guess Elizabeth Stride is, you know, you could still maybe question whether she actively participated, but it's also like this book doesn't really even know what like sex or sex work or work even is, and it doesn't really think about any of those things and how that will have affected how all relationships exist, especially like heterosexual Victorian patriarchal ones. I think there's just like a way that this book is really patronising too about like working class relationships, familial and otherwise. Like there's a couple points where I just feel like she, you know, she puts like, I don't know, husband in quotation marks, or like wife or whatever, when she's talking about people who are like common law spouses, which is just like a really common thing, and like it's not like a, like there's a reason why that's like a thing. You know, that's not the only time. I also felt like it happened with like familial relationships, and sometimes I felt like there was also just a lot of judgment, and then because she is desperately fighting against like, oh, these people weren't sex workers, they weren't sex workers. It's not like people making a value judgment when they say that. That's like she's the one who's like underlining that there is a value judgment in being a sex worker, and she's like reinscribing it by saying like, no, these women were victims, they weren't sex workers. I did also feel like there was a lot of stuff about alcoholism, especially because I'm pretty sure almost everyone actually read Polly's chapter like literally, I think I started it like in like May 2021. So I can't remember it quite as clearly as the rest of them, but I'm, you know, in all of the others, and I'm pretty sure in Polly's probably too, like they all were addicted in some way to alcohol, and it massively affected like the sort of course and path of their life. And the way that like Hallie Reubenhold writes about that, especially with Annie Chapman's life, I found really it just made me feel really uncomfortable, and like anyway, yeah, struggled with it a lot. There's a storm outside. I'm gonna give up recording this, but yeah, I hope that made sense. Oh, I did want to say that I did find Elizabeth Stride's chapter like extremely interesting because she's Swedish and from Gothenburg, and there was a lot about like, well, just stuff I really did not know at all, and about sex workers and like violence against sex workers and sort of state interventions into sex work, just like working class women's lives. I wrote like a little review of it, so I'll leave a link for that. It's on Storygraph. Okay. And I'll talk to you next with another update, hopefully with better lighting and less thunder and lightning. I've updated this in a really long time for many reasons. Yes, here I am. So yeah, my original plan was to read Lucy by Amalia Skram, which I did sort of intend to start like as I travelled from Norway to England, but I had a really stressful journey, so I ended up reading like 2 pages maybe and it just sort of vaguely put me off reading it for a while, and then, you know, that was like 2 months ago. And then my reading has kind of, you know, I have to sort of shift it because I'm reading stuff for my PhD, or like trying to and failing. You know, I mean, hopefully I can keep up sort of reading some things for pleasure, and obviously the overlap of like stuff for my PhD and stuff for pleasure should be there too. I was gonna say that I might read this for like during the rest of this vlog, but actually I think it's from 1890, but I'm not entirely sure. I thought it was maybe from the late 1880s. So that's a little annoying, but anyway, this is Margaret, Dunmore, or A Socialist Home, which is just like a novel about alternative living, as might be suggested by the title. I think it's very unlikely that I'll pick up Lucy in the next few weeks because I just have so much reading that I have to prioritise. So unfortunately I don't think I'll read this during this vlog, but you know, I'm sure I will one day, and from everything I've heard I think I'll like it. I did want to also mention this book, which is a poetry collection by Tara Bergin, and it's called The Tragic Death of Eleanor Marx, and I am currently reading it, and it's poetry, so it's sort of a bit easier to read right now. But I wanted to talk about it because I talked a little bit about Eleanor Marx, Madame Bovary, translation, suicide when I read Madame Bovary or Emma Bovary or whatever, and this kind of takes up those same ideas and Eleanor Marx's specific experience. I really liked the poems that are directly about Eleanor Marx, but I haven't really liked the rest of them so far. I mean, a couple I liked. There was one about like a baby giving you ideas, and I liked that a lot, and one of them quotes Frank O'Hara at the beginning, which obviously is a way to my heart. But yeah, and so it's not just about Eleanor Marx, it's also about her translating Emma Bovary, and also Emma Bovary, because obviously there are these like very specific and obviously like created in part by Eleanor Marx's behaviour and choices, connections between the two. So yeah, anyway, I just wanted to mention that, but I am going to keep reading because I think there are more at the end about Eleanor Marx, so you know. Well, outing myself as an Eleanor Marx like fangirl, but whatever. Another reason why I haven't kind of kept going reading for this vlog is because I'm just like desperately waiting for stuff to come in either to me or to the library, so that's very annoying. There's been a book called A City Girl by Margaret, which was kind of like one of the books that I was like, okay, I'm going to start with reading that as my beginning because it's kind of obviously overwhelming to begin, so I was like, okay, if I pick one book to begin, that's... But of course, not only was the first copy I ordered like cancelled and refunded because it probably got lost in the post or I don't know what happened, so then the next copy I ordered, it still hasn't got it here and it's been like 3 weeks, which it's supposed to take less time than that. So and I did also order it into the library because I was like, it's probably good to have like my own personal copy and also a copy in the library, and of course the library copy also hasn't arrived and I'm waiting for a whole bunch of other stuff to come in from the library, so all very annoying. Some of that stuff is from the 1880s, and I also have my 2 books that I would have liked to have read but are not here and won't get here in time for me to read them in October, I don't think, or if they do, you know, there'll be like a week left of October and it's just all a bit too stressful. And that would be The Rebel of the Family and A Story of an African Farm. I could start Story of an African Farm here, but again, like I wanted to do it in the order that I had like set out, so yeah, I think I'm gonna, you know, probably order a 3rd copy of A City Girl and hope that one actually shows up, and then go from there and see in the next few days and like a week or so if I sort of make any progress, and if I do I will come and update you, but if I don't I will just accept that I've read everything I can for this vlog right now and I'll move on. Do you like my dress? Like, I do like it, but I'm also not entirely sure about the cut because it's like quite high at the front, but then it like goes, it has a nice back actually, but like I still put the tag on in case I change my mind. Anyway, that's my update for now, so yeah. Hi, I thought I would just film my like final wrap up for this very long, very chaotic in terms of life vlog. So basically I've got like a chunk of the way into Margaret, Dunmore or A Socialist Home by Jane Hume Clapperton, and I'm obviously like on my way to finishing it, but I just think like it's silly to wait until I finished it to wrap this up. But also in the past few days I've read some of Henrik Ibsen's plays, and I like watched and read them at the same time because I thought that would be like a more interesting way to do it. Obviously there are like differences of adaptation and translation, but that's also kind of like an interesting process, and for the first 2 that I read, like it also kind of just helped me get through them because I didn't find them as interesting as I guess I thought I would, or like I don't know if that's entirely true, but I guess something like that. So yeah, I started by reading and watching The Wild Duck. There is like a quality to Ibsen that I think is just, his plays are very real, like they feel very grounded in actual people, which I think is really interesting. So yeah, the plays just tend to have like a quality of like, I don't know, good drama to them, I guess. But so The Wild Duck, like I was like enjoying it mostly, but then I really disliked the ending, so that kind of put me off a bit. And An Enemy of the People, I actually watched, like the library had a copy of the Arthur Miller adaptation of it, so I watched and read that, which was interesting because obviously it was from like 1966 and it was in black and white, and it was like very much obviously about McCarthyism and also, as you can tell from the title of the play, so it felt very like, you know, it felt like Arthur Miller obviously could see a lot of like his modern experience, his like contemporaneous experience in the play, and that one is what, from like 1882 I think, so you know that's like 80 years from when in 1966 it was being performed. Yeah, and like let alone it's still being relevant today. So An Enemy of the People is from 1882, The Wild Duck is from 1884, and Rosmer's Home is from 1886. And that's the last play in this collection I have, and it's also the last one I watched, and it's the one that I liked the most. I actually didn't watch it, I listened to like a radio play of it instead because I couldn't find a version to watch because it is quite like an adapted play, and I thought it was really, really good. I loved it a lot. I think it's really interesting, and like the main female character in it, Rebecca West, she is a really fascinating character, and she also was clearly very like inspirational to like some women socialists. or at least, I mean, Ibsen has had a massive impact on like the development of British socialist feminism, because a lot of them were really interested in his work, either in terms of like translation or performance, and obviously there will have been like delays and things, so they probably weren't watching them in 1884, 1886, but definitely like in the 1890s and probably the late 1880s, his work was being translated and performed, and you know, like Eleanor translated some of his work and stuff like that. So he's very much bound up in the sort of history and the women who I'm interested in, and also he inspired the author Rebecca West, who wrote, you know, the one that's like The Soldier's Coming Home, The Return of the Soldier, I think that's what it's called, which is like an incredibly written book, as well as like lots of other stuff, and she was like a suffragette. But like she took her name from Rosmersholm, like because the character in that is called Rebecca West, and like I don't know, it like kind of blows my mind up, and like I sort of love that a lot. I think it's really fascinating, especially because of like how the character Rebecca behaves. It's so interesting. And the play is also about free love. I mean, I guess like for it I would have liked to read maybe like a more up-to-date translation, not because I disliked this translation, but just because I'd be interested to see like how other translators have interpreted it. All of the translations in this edition were done by James Macfarlane in 1987 or so. So obviously like 30 years ago, you know, translation is looking very different, I feel. One more thing about Ibsen's plays actually, especially The Wild Duck and Rosmersholm. I mean, you probably do know what you're getting in for when you start watching an Ibsen play, especially when it's from the 1880s, and we've already discussed how suicide is like very present in the 1880s, especially like literary representations, I guess. But yeah, those are things that happen in his plays. Rosmersholm actually starts by talking about a woman who has killed herself, who's the wife. You see, this is also why I feel like Daphne du Maurier must have read Rosmersholm, sorry if I'm mispronouncing it, because like she, like the story is also kind of like Rebecca, but the Rebecca's position, like obviously Rebecca is the dead wife, whereas in Rosmersholm Rebecca West is the potential incumbent wife. Anyway, like probably not, but then at the same time like could be, but like maybe not, but then like could be. The thing is, it's obviously not that popular of a play to adapt in the UK, so you know that does mean it's like less likely. But I don't know. That's that. I also just thought like one of the books that I was I think talking about last time, like it did finally arrive, and that's A City Girl by Margaret Harkness, and also the library has got in not just this one but some of her other work too. This is in Darkest London, and it was published in 1889. Or 1890, but like originally published as a different named thing called like Captain Loeb. So yeah, I do have like a whole bunch of books to read from the 1880s now, way more than I began with. But I am gonna just like end this vlog here. I think it's gone on for long enough and has covered me through some key changes in my life. Yeah, I think that's, you know, everything I wanted to say, and thank you so much for watching, and definitely let me know like your thoughts about any of the things mentioned. It has been like a really man heavy, I guess, because of the Ibsen and the Flaubert stuff, but you know, hopefully still been interesting. Yeah, if you have watched this far, then if you want to leave like an emoji, then you could put like a little house emoji, or you could put, well, they've all been very sad books, haven't they? You could put like a little tear emoji or you could put a duck emoji. Cool. Well, I hope you're having a great day when you watch this, and I will talk to you when I next talk to you. Bye!